Hey folks, welcome to Snowpal's Polyglot Software Development Podcast. Our guest today is Brian Coblitz. Brian is the Executive Director of the George Washington University Technology Commercialization Office. Brian's an angel investor and ran a small services business for about 10 years. Brian's scientific background is in biology. Today we're going to talk about a few different things, but primarily try to keep our focus on licensing technology from universities. Without further ado, Brian, if you could just give a brief introduction to our audience, we can get rolling.
Sure. Thank you for having me, Krish. I've listened to a number of your podcasts, and I really appreciate your welcoming style and inquisitive nature. So I do want to do a brief statement that my opinions are my own and not those of the George Washington University. But I'm excited to have a discussion with you today about licensing technology from universities and wherever else it takes us.
Thank you so much. Yeah, before we get started, Brian, if you could just give a brief introduction about yourself to our audience, just a little bit about what you do, your background. I think that'll set us up nicely for the conversation.
Got it. So my background is as a biologist. So I went to grad school at Johns Hopkins University for cell and molecular biology and focused on neuroscience. I actually was studying the trafficking of ion channels to the cell surface, as those are critical for conduction of the signals that our nerves send around the body. And after those studies, I thought if I'm going to be in neuroscience, I should actually work on an organism, something that has an actual neuron instead of the human cells in a dish, which are basically derived from skin, which was most of my projects at Hopkins. So then I transitioned to a postdoc at Columbia University and was working on the model organism C. elegans, which is a 1 millimeter long worm. And I worked under Professor Marty Chalfie, who won the Nobel Prize for green fluorescent protein, actually, while I was there. And his lab focused on studying the sense of touch. So we tickled these little tiny worms with our eyebrow hairs. We glued the eyebrow hairs onto a toothpick and used that to tickle the worms while looking under a microscope. So after a few years of that, and I looked around and realized that I didn't want to be in the lab forever. And some of the successful postdocs were there for 9+ years. And that was a little bit more than what I was looking for. So I wanted to transition into business somehow and looked at either consulting or technology transfer. And chose technology transfer and focused on how to get in there. And so I took classes, some of which at the school that the National Institutes of Health has called the Foundation for Advanced Education in the Sciences. They had a fabulous program there and very low cost and worked directly with leaders in their tech transfer office at the NIH. Shortly after that, and after volunteering in that office, then I began at the George Washington University at what's now the Technology Commercialization Office. And during that transition, I also took the patent bar and became a registered patent agent. So my role at the Technology Commercialization Office at the time, I was managing the life sciences portfolio. So any invention that came out of GW related to medical applications, whether it be a drug, a device, or a diagnostic, those kind of fell onto my plate to work with those inventors, think about how we might protect their new technologies, usually by patenting, and then go through that process with outside counsel. And once we had something filed, start to market those technologies to companies and entrepreneurs to see if they would partner and develop products out of them so that we could make an impact on the world out of our research. And along the way, go ahead, Krish.
Oh, no, please continue.
Along the way, I got the opportunity to start making investments in startup companies myself. Joined a fantastic group called the Life Science Angels out in Palo Alto. This was thanks to the pandemic. We had a lot of meetings on Zoom. And so I was able to participate in evenings here and continue to do that. And so that helps me get the perspective of a bit from the other side of the table to really understand these licensees that I'm partnering with. What do they need to do to be successful, to raise the capital they need to develop these ideas into actual products? And then the last few years, I've been directing the office. So it's a new challenge there, really leading the team to work together to cover the entire portfolio, not just life sciences, but physical sciences, engineering, chemistry, the whole gamut.
That's an amazing introduction. My apologies. It's Dr. Coblitz, right?
Yes, that's right.
I'm
But I,
sorry.
t- I tend to not remind people of that because I'm in the business world and we're all here to get deals done and not wave
Sure.
titles and
Do you?
faces.
My apologies. Do you want me to address you as Brian or Dr. Koblitz? I'm more than happy
Brian,
to do it.
Brian will be great. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. That was a wonderful introduction. By way of quick introduction, I if I should even dare say this, I studied biology back in college like 100 years ago, but I wouldn't even mention it because sometimes you study something for a while before realizing that you're not born to be doing that at all. I realized very soon that no, Krish, biology is not for me. It is a brilliant subject, but it's just I was not even close to being good enough. I studied with a lot of friends who are amazing and who are still in the field, of biology and molecular sciences and genetics and pharmacy, and a lot of the folks who I went to school with. But I barely survived. But which is awesome to talk to somebody here who has a strong background there. I have a lot of questions and I have to, apologies. Some of them are silly enough, but I'm just going to, learn more about whatever you just mentioned there, Brian, and also, have our audience be more educated about all the experience you bring to the table. So our topic for today, right? At least the broader topic was, and you touched upon it a little bit already, but just to, go back, step back and say licensing technology from universities. So from the perspective of a startup, right? So I run a startup in the DC Metro. We build products, and that's what we sort of do for a living. We can chat a little bit about it during this conversation as well, and after that too. But in that context, my question is for me, for us, and for other startup founders, what does it mean to engage with universities such as yours and others as well, to licensing? What does licensing technology from universities mean? Where should we get started? Like at the 30,000 foot level, what does it mean if we have no experience in any of this, which we actually personally do not? Where should we start educating ourselves here?
Well, I think this conversation is a great first start. Of course, all the offices like mine, we have web pages available explaining the process and LinkedIn pages and all these sort of things. But the best way is to have that conversation, and we're very open to that. We like a hands-on approach, and what I really like about this job is that we are building very long-term relationships, partnerships. When you look at a patent, the life of the patent is 20 years. So oftentimes we're planning to work together for almost 20 years, if not more, because there's usually improvements made and more patents will be filed after the relationship starts. So that's the great thing here, that we need to be very open, very understanding, and make sure we're on the same page to be able to go for such an endeavor together. So what is licensing? The simplest way to put it is it means renting the idea. So we get with a patent, we get from the government, say the U.S., a period of exclusivity where we can prevent other people or companies from making a certain product or using a certain process, and that ability to stop others is what we rent out to our partners. So they pay us for the right where we're going to say, okay, you're going to make this product. We're not going to sue you for doing that. We're actually allowing you to do it, and we're agreeing to perhaps sue somebody else if they make it, so that you're able to benefit from that period of exclusivity that we got from the government.
Okay, so what I'm going to do here, just so as I learn this, I don't draw very well, but I think very pictorially. So I'm going to go to a tool and we're going to, just draw some circles and only 3 or 4 shapes that I even know how to draw. That way we can capture the essence of this conversation a bit more visually, right? And I think I sometimes see that it reinforces to me and to some other people as well. So let me go to a tool and I'm going to capture everything that you say here to the best of my ability as we go. So let me go to the tool in a second here. Okay, I'm going to share my screen. Okay, tell me if you see my screen there, just a blank screen, blank.
I do.
And then, okay, perfect. I'm going to start with my usual.
Yes, while you get going, I want to mention that the other great place to learn about this process is through our professional society, which is called Autumn, AUTM. So
Okay.
they have a number of training and events available. They also have a really cool website called the Better World Project, which displays a number of success stories of different types of
Sorry,
technologies.
Brian, hang on 1 second. I want to capture your previous point here. Sorry, just so I don't miss that. Yep. So I'm going to title this licensing technology from universities. Just give it a bit of color there. Okay, perfect. You'll see how super simple my diagrams end up being, and you're going to laugh at them. But okay, the first thing that you mentioned there, let me just. Okay. The first item, Brian, if you could go back to that before we come back to what you just mentioned, right? Just when I was starting to draw this, after you had mentioned it, the very first thing that is you mentioned that what the university, in other words, you're giving the rights to this partner to develop something in collaboration with the school. I mean, I know I'm rephrasing that loosely, but is there a reasonable way to rephrase it?
Well, I think the collaboration has a whole spectrum of whether it really exists at all or not.
Okay.
It could be a very strong collaboration, but eventually, the end of the day, universities are great at basic research. They're not great at developing products. So at some point, that's going to fully be transitioning to work on the company side.
Great at
But the
research.
goal you have correct, and let's develop products.
So should I say no? The university is great at research, and the idea behind partnering, the partners are I would say do the actual development, right? I'm wording this
Yes,
loosely, but does that sort
yes.
of capture it, right? So the university says, you know what, we know how to do the research. That's what we do for a living, pretty much. Other than educating students and the next generation of folks. But the partners, not necessarily their skill or forte. So the partnership here is universities bring research to the table, and the partner says, you know what, this is how I can sort of realize your research and make it something that's functional. I mean, is that a fair, reasonable way to put it?
That's a pretty good start. And then, of course, we want them to take it to the next level after the development and do the marketing and sales.
Okay, so let's go with okay. Let me tie this together. Drawing this makes this conversation a little bit slower, but I've seen that it gives me time to digest and also sort of visualize some of what we're talking about here. So hopefully this makes some sense. Yep. Okay.
Well, it's helping me see what you're thinking, and so I can help clarify things.
Absolutely. Yep. I'm going to keep this shape here. Okay. So the next thing is before you mention the tool, right? You mentioned the tool. Let's talk about that tool. You said it's AUTM, right?
That was the professional society, AUTM. Yeah, you have one extra U there.
Oh, sorry. Yep. So this is you said oops, let me do this. AUTM. A little bit about this, Brian, about this professional society, what it means and how does it relate to the conversation that we're actually having here?
So that's the society. Well, the acronym doesn't stand for anything anymore, but it used to be the Association of University Technology Managers. So it's really around the focus of what we call technology transfer which, although I understand there are many types of technology transfer, we are focused on that from research institutions to industry.
Okay, so what, in other words, just to tie this together, when the partner works with the universities in building, and we'll get into the weeds of it to the extent possible, where does this professional society come into play? Is the collaboration sort of between the partner and the university via the professional society, or sort of where does that come into picture?
It does not get involved in particular university industry collaborations. It's more a chance for training and exchange of best practices of how to do this process.
Okay, training and exchange of best practices. Okay, perfect. And
And what I wanted to mention about their website was they have a place called the Better World Project where they display some of the success stories, so you can really see and understand what are products that have come out of university ideas.
this one, right? Am I in the right place
Yeah,
here?
that's it.
Okay, cool. So in other words, as a partner gets started in exploring this, do we go here to find out what it is that the university is actually researching about, so we know what sort of piques our interest in to having this initial conversation? Would that sort of be our starting point, like looking at this to get a sense of, hey, what is the school actually,
Mm.
what is the school working on right now in terms of research?
So this is such a great question because this really gets at one of the biggest problems in our industry, because we're really about making connections between the researchers, the output from that research, and entrepreneurs and businesses. But there's no one-stop shop where you can just find all of the technologies that are available to license. So that is a challenge. So it's really something that if you're interested in it, I would say the best place is to call up your regional or local university, their office, and meet with them, and they will sit down together with you and go over their portfolio and see if they can find a fit for your interest. You can also do it from the comfort of your home, because each university has a website where they're displaying what's available. But you're going to learn a lot more if you spend the time for the conversation.
I got it. And would that, in other words, would we be reaching out to someone like Brian in each of those universities? Would, like who would this partner be actually trying to reach out to? Like, I know they probably might be called differently in different departments or different schools, but in terms of research and finding out who should you engage with initially, what are those typical titles, if that makes sense, Brian?
Yes. So yes, somebody like me, either you know, yes. So our team, we have licensing managers, we call them. So they're the key points of contact for entrepreneurs and businesses looking to license technologies. And that would be my starting place. You might find they have similar or other kinds of titles like a business development officer or technology transfer something or other. Associate is a common term, or officer. So those are the types of titles. You might also just identify the office, so you can search for a technology transfer office or technology commercialization office. You might also find the name of some, innovation might be in the name of the office, something like that, or
Ah, I see
licensing
what you
even.
mean. Okay. Okay, perfect. I'm going to add those words here. Innovation / licensing, etc. Perfect. Uh, it might, and hopefully this doesn't come across as silly, because titles, personally, and as somebody who runs a company, title in itself doesn't necessarily mean a whole lot, because they are used pretty loosely, right? Different places call it differently. But I've seen that sometimes you need to know who to reach out to, for that reach out to be meaningful. And I say this in the context of us doing something that, a slight digression, which is as an engineering company with a bunch of engineers, some things come naturally to us and some not so much, right? We have to kind of go outside our comfort zones to find out that those are things that we ought to do, even though it may or may not come naturally to us. And to be honest, not nobody even wants to do it. One of the most important things that nobody wants to do, but everyone needs to do, is sales. And we've learned over the last many months that you could build whatever it is that you want to build. It could be a beautiful little thing sitting on your desk. Nobody's ever going to find it till you make an effort to actually reach out to people, and that takes it's sometimes it seems easier, but we realize it's very, very difficult. Hitting somebody up on LinkedIn and asking them a basic question takes a monumental effort. You almost have to push yourself, and before we hit the submit button, we ask ourselves 1,000 questions. Does it sound right? Is it too many words? Is it too few words? Just because that's not what comes naturally to us. And the reason I mentioned that is we realize that sometimes we reach out, do everything correctly, but except that we're talking to the wrong person in the sense that they are not in that business, right? It's almost like you're prospecting, and you're talking to somebody who either has no interest in it or has no business in what it is that we're having this conversation about. And then we realize, it's important to do the sale, to initiate this conversation and to build a relationship, but it doesn't happen overnight. And for it to even happen organically, you need to be cognizant of who it is that you're having this conversation with and have a read on where they come from, what their backgrounds are. And this long backstory is because, which is why these titles, these clues that you're giving us here is going to be helpful, not just to us as a company, Brian. I promise you, I talked to a lot of the startup founders, even in the DC Startup Week, like last week. Everyone has an idea. Almost everybody has more than one idea. But the challenge is taking that idea and seeing it through to execution, right? In other words, every day we wake up, I wake up as an entrepreneur, I have like 10 ideas and they all sound brilliant at the top of the day. And then as the day progresses, you realize 8 of those 10 ideas make no sense. And I'm like, who in the world came up with this idea? And I'm like, oh my God, it was me who came up with it in the first place. And then you recognize that a few days go by and you digest it. And if you had 50 ideas or 15 ideas, I would say one of them might actually make a little bit more sense for it to be continued into the subsequent weeks. And if the idea doesn't die in like 4 weeks' time, that's when we give it any element of respect, right? We're like, you know what? If we try to kill this as much as we could and we couldn't successfully kill it, so maybe it's worth exploring, which is kind of a segue to the next part of what I want to ask here. You mentioned
Before you move on, can I add one?
Oh, absolutely. Sorry, please go ahead.
So, you mentioned about finding the right person and who to contact and all of that. So we want to make sure that that's not an issue for how we can make a connection. So all you have, if you were to just find our office, you can email us at tco@gwu.edu, and it goes to everybody in the office. So then we can figure out who's the best person to respond to you and get back to you quickly with the appropriate information or follow up to have a meeting.
Awesome. Super. So essentially, you said tco@gwu.edu, and that's for George Washington. Similarly, every university is going to have part of the challenge is, the titles are going to be different. How they are presented on their websites is going to be different. So we have to do a bit of this due diligence and digging into finding out who do we engage, how do we get started. But I guess we do one or two. It's typically like, your first week at the job is the most difficult, right? Or in school or whatever it is in life. And then if you wait through that, you feel like, you've sort of understood the streets or the directions and you can start driving a little bit faster and quicker. So those are wonderful, great points. So thank you for adding that. So let me go back to sharing my screen again, because I want to add one more here. And again, feel free to chime in and interrupt me, because I can talk at length. And sometimes if I'm digressing, please interrupt. Not a problem at all. The next thing I want to ask here is, at the top of this, where you introduce yourself, you mentioned a number of things of a lot of interest to me, but to be honest, not everything. I have to go back and watch it to digest the technicality of the details of the area of research that you're working on, for instance, right, Brian? So this is a very basic, fundamental question. So universities are going to be researching on a number of different items. How do we, as we get engaged with folks like, the business development officers, the technology associates and whatnot that we just talked about, how do we find sort of a natural marriage between the two? Like, how, what are the initial steps? Meaning, hey, we are a company, we do X, Y, and Z. Here are our interests. Those are engineering interests per se. But from a university standpoint, research and what comes out of the research is what is most important, right? Whether the research is realized through building it in Java versus C Sharp or Golang or AWS or Azure probably makes no difference. So, what? How should that initial conversation be between the partner and the university, saying, you know what, here's kind of our skills and our interests, and this is what we bring to the table, and then the university is like, hey, here's what we're trying to research on. And I'm guessing day one, minute one, hour one, that conversation was going to have, in my mind, a complete disconnect. And how do we get closer to bridging that disconnect? And tell me if this question doesn't make sense, and I'll rephrase.
No, that's in the ballpark. So I think how to so for the tech transfer portion, which my office is very focused. Some universities have other functions lumped together in this sort of office beyond just the tech transfer. But for the tech transfer, we generally have a product idea in mind already, because you really need that at this stage when you're filing a patent application. And so the researchers have done the initial research. They have made some kind of a discovery and then thought about how this discovery might be applied in the marketplace as a product or a service. And so they probably have developed some sort of a proof of concept of this technology already. And then we're going and protecting that and marketing that to entrepreneurs and businesses to partner with. So it's a little bit later stage where we're already looking at the output from the research before we're trying to partner. And so we have those specific outputs that we can go through with the business people, potential licensees, and see which ones fit in their technical expertise, their areas of interest, what are the types of products or services they're interested in providing, and if any of those actually fit in that Venn diagram of what we have available. There's another, related function at the university, which is collaborative research or sponsored research, where businesses may want to pay researchers at a university to do some foundational work, all generally with the idea that there's going to be some publications coming out of this. And that's a little bit different operation, but again, it involves a relationship between industry and university.
Okay, perfect. And you said that was, I'm just going to make a note here, collaborative research.
Yes, or sponsored research, where it's just more the industry has come up, well, it depends. It could be the idea came from industry or the university, but regardless, the industry is interested enough in the potential outcomes of the research that they would pay for that.
Okay, got it. Makes sense.
So that's something that we usually, as we're usually I'm explaining this to the researchers at the university, all these processes, and what we often tell them is that sponsored research is a common outcome after a license is executed. So we have a company, they want to develop a product idea that we've come up with, but there's some additional validation that they want done at the university, and so then they would sponsor that to be done in the lab at the university.
Makes sense.
That's a
Makes sense.
common outcome after we do the license.
Perfect. Got it. Okay. So the next thing I want to ask about, and again, if there are items I'm missing here, which I'm sure I am, Brian, please feel free to chime in and we can talk about that. I'm just going with my super high level understanding or lack thereof as I'm learning and being educated by you. Thanks to your patience. So please always, chime in if we should talk about something slightly different as well. So the next thing I want to ask here is the domain expertise of the partner, right? So we'll get into technology in a bit. But in terms of domain expertise, like what kind of domain expertise is generally expected of the partner? And answer could be, well, there isn't any domain expertise expected at all, because it's not what exactly that the partner is expected to bring to the table. But I just want to ask that question. Is there a notion of domain expertise that is expected of the partner?
So first, I want to mention that in most cases these days, universities are licensing to startup companies or small companies. And this is because the larger companies are more risk averse and they're willing to wait, let the startups do all the, difficult development, take the big risks. And if it's working out, then they'll buy it, right? So they're most often we're licensing to an entrepreneur or a small company that already has a full team with business people and technical side. So
Okay.
regardless, we hope that they have domain expertise. If it's an entrepreneur, then we certainly are looking for them to understand how to raise money so that they can execute the development, hire a good technical team and get the project to the final stages. But and those different domains, they have very different developmental processes. It's a completely different thing if we are talking about developing software versus we're talking about developing a medical device or a drug, right? So you have different kind of regulatory concerns. You have different timelines, different budgetary needs, right? So having that specific experience in the domain is very helpful. Um, and but that key is kind of understanding the process as a whole. Hopefully, you've been through it before and can avoid some pitfalls and move a little quicker the next time around.
Okay, makes sense. And then while the partner works with the university in this engagement, do they how does monetization come into play? So let me draw the same shape again for monetization. If you could just speak a little bit to the monetization. In other words, does the university have sort of a budget allocated for this that they share with the partner? Or is the partner expected to spend their sort of time, resources, and money in building this and seeing this through Fusion? How does that work?
Right. Yes. So it's generally safe to say that it's mostly the university is expecting the company to fund the process. Um, Actually, we were talking about the DC Startup and Tech Week last week, and I missed a lot of that because I was at a conference called Convergence, which is put on by a company called InnovaSource, and the whole conference is about gap funds related to universities. So the idea here is that we are going to provide funds to advance the technology further than where it was when it came directly out of the basic research, closer to product development. So whether it be a minimum viable product or additional types of product validation, customer discovery, if it's medical, maybe animal studies. Um, so those are funds that we may put into the projects, whether it be before or after licensing, uh, that help get them to the end goal. But that's not necessarily the case for most of the technologies that are licensed, that they're able to take advantage of those.
Does it mean, Brian, just so I understand, which means the idea, the research, and the problem is shared by the university with the partner, but the cost of building it is, you mentioned that it's typically on the partner, right? It's for the partner to take that and build it, do it however they think the best way to do it is, but it's not actually necessarily funded by the university.
Right. So the way I like to think about it simply is, to build a startup, you need three things, right? You need technology, you need people, and you need money. And the university is generally providing the technology, as far as the initial idea, conception, and maybe the patent along with that. And then the business is expected to provide the the other two.
Okay, makes sense. So which means, well, let's say that we take this product through to fruition. We engage with the partner, engages with the university. Whatever the time, we'll come to the time frame in a second. Let's say we build this. Once they start monetizing, how does that work? Because the original idea came from the university. Is there like a sort of a split between the partner and the university, like in terms of the profit and the revenue?
Exactly. So that's where the renting concept gets in, just like you pay rent, to have your apartment if you're renting that. It's the same idea, but a lot more complicated with the technology licenses. If you want to get into specifics, we can talk about all the different types of
Oh yeah, to
revenues
the
that may
extent we
flow
can,
back.
absolutely. Yep, perfect. Yep.
Well, okay. So, so I like to put this into maybe three buckets where you have fees, equity, and royalty.
Okay, let me draw this here. Pick a different color. You
And
you
maybe there's a
mentioned
fourth one, you might see it separate as a patent cost reimbursement.
if you could say that again, Brian. Fees was one.
Fees, equity, and royalty.
Okay, equity, and the
So
third one was royalty. Okay, and you said there could be a fourth one as well.
yeah, the fourth one being patent cost reimbursement. So that one we kind of see as just recouping the cost that we put in to the IP protection so far,
Okay,
and we generally like to get that as early as possible so that we have budget to file on new inventions at the university.
you mentioned it's patent reimbursement, right?
Yeah, patent cost reimbursement. Yeah.
Okay, patent cost reimbursement. Okay, if you could just talk a little bit about each of these items, that would be awesome.
Sure. So with the patent costs, it certainly is not cheap to write up and file patents. So we are taking the risk and going ahead and doing that for these ideas. That's a large part of our job, is to evaluate the new inventions as they're disclosed to us from the researchers and see if we can envision there being a product at the end of the day, whether we think that an entrepreneur might want to license this, and decide whether to spend the money to go ahead and protect that. So that decision is based, kind of break that into two parts. One, do we think we can protect it? And two, do we think somebody will want to license? And generally, that's depending on there being a market for it. Right. So we're going to put a pretty significant investment in there. We do start with a provisional patent, which is relatively low cost, and then we can start marketing, try and get some feedback from potential licensees as to whether this has legs. But after a year, we're going to have to put in really significant investment to fully draft the application. And then another year and a half later, then we have to decide what are all the countries we want to file in, and that could get really costly. So we're really hoping to get these licenses done within the first 2 or so years after we get the idea filed. So it's a lot of time pressure on us for marketing, but that's the name of the game. The whole invention game involves being under time pressure, as you, I'm sure, understand. Dealing a lot with startups that once you get VC funding, regardless, you're under time pressure to get to profitability, right? Same idea here. It's just even more so because patents have that finite life of 20 years. And so you really got to get the most out of those years that you have. And a lot
So
of
in
those
other
are
words,
spent.
there's a sorry. No, what I was going to ask is that there's a cost. There's a lot that goes into patent, and the cost associated with that. So when we say reimbursement, it's when this idea starts to make money is when all of this kicks in, right? Till the idea actually is executed and it makes money, none of these come into play. Is that right, Brian?
No. So that's like, kind of like renting an apartment and not having to pay for 5 or 10 years, right? But you still
Ah,
live in
okay.
it. So we actually, it's the reverse. So we're looking to get the patent cost reimbursement as early as we can, understanding that sometimes with startups it takes a little bit of time before they have some money to do that. But then the fees, royalty, and equity, they spread those revenues over different time frames. So once we get into that, then I think that will become a little clearer, what's early on, what's on the back end. So why don't I describe a few of those pieces?
Okay.
So uh, I guess we can start with royalty. It's at the top. So that one is along with your notion, that one is exactly what you said, where we make money once they make sales. So generally, we're looking at percentage of the net sales that the company makes will be then given to the university under the license.
Okay. Got it. Perfect. Anything more to that for that item?
I think that's pretty good on that one. That's a relatively simple piece. The equity
Okay.
also, I think you're maybe very familiar with. So, that is provided at the time of the license, and so it's an ownership share in the company, and so that's something that we use. It's not in every license, but often in licenses to startups, because the startups don't have much cash to provide in fees at the beginning.
Right.
So that's the way that we can find a balance that will eventually get compensated, through the sale of that equity when the company is public or sold. And we're willing to wait for that. The nice thing about the upside of waiting for it is that it provides some insurance to us as the technology provider that even if our technology is not ending up in the final product that the company develops, we're getting some credit from providing that technology at the early stages of the company that help them raise funding and get everything moving forward. So it's a
Makes
little
sense.
bit of a good balance there, where if the royalties don't work out, at least we get a little something.
Perfect. Okay. And then it takes us to fees.
Last is the fees. So the fees, they cover a range of different types. So generally there's something up front. This helps to demonstrate the company has skin in the game, and we can work out our processes of how we pay each other and things like that. Then there are usually annual fees that ensure that this is something the company does want to continue working on, because we are very motivated to get a product to the market one way or the other. We are not interested in having our product sit on the shelf and not be developed. So we don't want, then first of all, most importantly, we wouldn't be benefiting society with the output of our research if this is never becoming a product.
Got it. So
So
that
we
sense
have
of commitment from the partner, essentially, right?
exactly. So they can decide at any time, hey, this thing's not working out. I don't want to develop this. After all, I'm going to just terminate the license, give it back to the university, go find somebody else. Right? That's always an option for the company. So we like to have that annual fee, make them think a little bit, are we really still working on this or not?
Okay.
And then, we get a second chance. And then there may be some fees tied to specific milestones, where they made a big achievement in the development, which would increase the value of the company, decrease the amount of risk left to get to a product stage, and they can go and raise more money, a nice
So
value inflection point.
these are fees that we paid by the partner to the university, correct, Brian?
Exactly.
Okay. Paid by
So that's
partner.
something that a lot of startups, they are uncomfortable with. So we understand that there's still a lot of development to be done. They're still often cash strapped, so they're usually not. Um, we try to not make that painful. It needs to be something that will, generally for all the terms, right? We need to make sure we have a viable company. So So depending
Perfect.
on how big's the market, potential that they may get pretty significant, but generally we're more focused on the royalty side of things where it's all win-win.
Okay, I'm getting a better picture as we go. So thank you for patiently walking through this, and I can imagine this being immensely helpful to a lot of companies that are, startups like us who may or may not understand the nuances of what's involved here. This last segment, last 5 to 10 minutes of what you explained here, uh, has pops up a broader question in my mind. So the university surely wants to see this go through to fruition, right, to production, but at the same time, they do want to sort of monetize in the process. Now, the question I have is, let me stop sharing that for a second so I see more of you, and then I'll share it again. So, Brian, here's my question as I'm thinking through this as a founder. Now, it takes a lot of effort, money, time, and initiative, and name it to build anything, right? Like the idea, to quote Dilbert, Scott Adams from like years ago. I'm going to not do justice, but I love what I remember from what I remember. Someone gets up and he says, I have a brilliant idea, right? So the next question someone asks follow up to that is, hey, do you have money to invest in this idea? And the answer is, no, actually, I don't have any money. And then the next question would be, do you have the technical know-how to see this idea through to fruition? He's like, yeah, not really. I don't have the technical know-how. And then the follow-up response in the most succinct, beautiful Scott Adams manner was, if you neither have the technical know-how nor the money to see an idea through to fruition, the idea in itself in pure economic terms is actually called nothing, right? It's absolutely nothing because everybody has an idea and has like, as going through the startup week, I realized a number of people walking up to me and saying, what, I have these 3 ideas or 2 ideas. And then it's very painful to help people understand that not every idea actually makes sense because gone through the pain ourselves. But some of those ideas might make sense, and a small percentage of them actually warrant time and investment in it. And the reason I say this huge thing is the university certainly wants to have a gain, and understandably so, and they're working with these smaller companies and startups. So what is the it's sort of a rhetorical question, but it's also a genuine question. What is Why should the startup stop everything they might possibly be doing, engage with universities in helping the universities realize their research ideas through to fruition, especially because it sounds to me, and it's wrong, that a lot of the risk is also on the startup side, right? Because the time and the money and the research needs to happen. So why should startups actually be willing and wanting to do this? What is their gain?
That's a great question. Uh, so I think there are different qualities of ideas, and not all of them are worth zero. So the nice thing about universities is they attract some of the most innovative people because of the freedom that they provide to work on what you want to work on, and the time that the time and funding that the grant process provides for that. So they're able to apply to the federal government, different agencies for quite a lot of funding for you know different research projects, right? And then they have generally a lot of freedom of how to apply that funding and achieve some sort of new discovery or outcome or knowledge. And then they're
Oh,
incentivized uh, to think about the applications of the outcomes of that research because of the policies at our universities, where we are sharing a significant amount of the revenue that we get from licensing with the inventors. So at GW, we give 40 to 50% of the income that we make directly to our inventors. And so that's something that's very different from what you get in industry. As far as I understand, many larger companies give inventors a pat on the back or a thank you note or maybe some kind of recognition, but generally not a huge monetary incentive there. So we have very creative people coming up with the cutting edge research. It's based on millions of dollars of funding, and so there's quite a lot that goes in here as they come up with the idea, validate the idea through different experiments, and develop their proof of concept or their prototypes and test those so that they ensure that there's a good chance that the product's going to work.
Perfect. Right. In other words, that's beautifully said. I'm going to just rephrase it for my own understanding as well. Is I've had a lot of conversation about product market fit with a number of founders recently on the podcast, and I would tell me if this makes sense. I would almost call it product market fit, right? In other words, if you have an idea, like I said, everybody has an idea or they have 10 ideas, but not a majority of those ideas either do not make a lot of sense or are almost impossible given the time, money, and research and expertise of the partner or the companies to exceed through to fruition. I could have a really genuinely good idea, but if I don't have the technical know-how or the money or some amount of it, at least I'm never going to be able to see it through to production. So there's no point in having the good idea. But here, what you mentioned is there, given the fact that this is cutting edge research done by highly qualified people at the university, that there is substance in that idea to begin with. And, if you did build it nicely, right? And we'll talk about what that nicely means, then there is a good chance that you could actually monetize through that idea. I mean, would that be a reasonable summary of what you mentioned? Did I capture that correctly, Brian?
Yes, and then I'd like to add on that you know, that partnership also helps the business people raise money. So the investors, they understand and respect the key opinion leaders at universities, and that they're coming up with some of the most creative solutions and have valuable you know, partnerships where should the company collaborate on continued validation with the university, they may have some unusual resources that can be applied for that, in terms of maybe connections at hospital or to identifying patients for a study and other doctors and things like that that could test the MVP and help move things along quickly. But I want to kind of go further deeper on what you said about product market fit, because this is one of the huge issues with the industry of technology transfer, where for the longest time is just all these solutions in search of a problem, right? And so it's very hard to sell those to industry. And we're very fortunate in the last 10 or so years that uh, that new programs have been established and just spread like wildfire to train these academic researchers in how to find product market fit. And so this greatly improves the chances that the technologies we're working on are actually solving a problem, and that the researchers can communicate effectively with the business partners. So this grew out of the I-Corps program that was developed by the National Science Foundation, but it just has been reproduced and spread across the country and across the world at this point, which is based on Steve Blank's books about the business model canvas and lean innovation. And the idea is that we're taking these researchers, both professors, students, as well as postdocs, putting them into a team with a business mentor, and then sending them out of the university to go talk to potential customers and just listen to what their problems are. And then think about whether the technologies they've come up with are actually going to solve the problem that the customers have or not. Do they maybe need to go back to the lab and tweak their idea a bit so it's solving the real problem, or do more research, or maybe is ready and they're going to go start a company and move it forward, or maybe it's really just not a company, it's something that's only good for a license, and that's the way to move it forward. I mean, to an existing large company.
And I think that's extremely important. And I can say that, as we went live with our first product like 5 years ago, and we built many along the way. Uh, the product market fit and how, what it means in the context of what you're building, because as a company we have, say, a few different products. Like Brian, we have APIs, B2B APIs, we have web apps, mobile apps, and whatnot. But I want to say, when you talk product market fit, that changes quite significantly between, not just industries, between the type of products, the type of business you're in. Like, it's so different between, say, a B2C product and a B2B product, and within a B2B product, depending on what type of problems it's solving. So, even no matter how much you read about it, product market fit, sometimes you have, at least personally and professionally, felt that we have to live through that pain of building something, making some headway, and then recognizing that, what, maybe there isn't that fit that we were expecting to begin with. Coming to terms with that and changing courses is painful, especially as a smaller organization. But at least, experience tells me that there is no other way to do it, but sometimes to sort of bite the bullet, accept it, make adjustments, accommodations, and build something differently. So in that context, I can say that whatever you just mentioned there makes a lot of sense, because working with people closely who can sort of help guide you through the process of either establishing product market fit, or even identifying that there isn't one to begin with, is actually a very phenomenally useful thing at any point of building whatever it is that anybody is building.
Yeah. It's really an enlightening process, I think, for a lot of the participants. They're used to doing experiments in the lab, but they're not used to thinking about the business model as an experimental process, something that you need to go and test and get data to validate and find the right course.
Yeah, I have a very specific question in that regard, but before I do that, and so I don't forget, I made a note here. I don't know if I worded this correctly. Does the university typically work with the partners in applying for funding, or is that solely on the partner?
So, no, well, I mean, some universities have venture funds and they will put money in directly into companies. That's relatively few. Um, but I want to add that there are a number of other types of relationships that can be formed aside from the actual licensing agreement. So one could be that, well, I mean, generally it's expected that the inventors will provide some advice to the company. You know, what are some of their notes about how you actually do this stuff to help them get going? So that'd be kind of the minimal uh, input there. But many times there are also co-founders coming from these labs, whether they be students or postdocs, or sometimes even principal investigators. The faculty themselves are involved on the founding team or on the scientific advisory board or technical advisory board of the company, and providing advice in a more structured, regular manner. So, if you're on the scientific advisory board, you might even be attending the company's pitches to VCs to help explain, why this invention is so awesome.
Okay, makes sense. And in this context, do the universities typically care if the partners are sort of co-located in the same, the same state, same city, yada yada yada, or it doesn't matter where the partners are actually physically located as a company?
It depends on the university. So, like the simplest way to break down probably is whether it's a public or private university. So if it's public and it's state funded, then they're going to have interest in forming businesses in that state and creating jobs in that state. If they're private, that may be a nice thing, but it's less emphasized, and we're very much agnostic as to where the businesses are. So, at GW, we have partners all over the country, all the usual places you'd expect, Boston, but also others, Ohio, of course, DC and Virginia and Maryland. That's by virtue of, this is a contact sport, and a lot of places we meet licensees are in-person conferences, etc. So they're forming companies locally as well.
Makes sense, right? And then as part of this, one of my questions was, so you mentioned, the renting as an example, right? The university does need to benefit during the course. They don't want to wait till the actual monetization happens, or if it does happen at all. Does it mean that the startups need to be already funded to be able to engage in this? Like, what kind of money? In other words, if somebody's watching this, there's solopreneurs, single developers or founders, or two people who are starting a company. Like, do they need to have a significant or a fair bit of money, Brian, here to be engaged in this, because the university needs to sort of monetize along the way, and they're not going to necessarily wait till this product is built and shipped and starts monetizing? So if you could speak a little bit to that, that'd be very helpful.
I would say it's less about the fees that are being asked by the university and more driven by the patent costs. And so that depends on the stage of the patent prosecution. How recently was this invention filed? What countries do you need to file in to protect this product? Is this something where your market is really just the US? Are you manufacturing in the US or somewhere else? Are you also looking at Europe and Japan and China and all these other places? So those are going to influence the cost significantly. And universities, like I said, we're trying to get reimbursed for those as soon as we can, but we understand that some startups haven't raised money yet, and that's not necessarily possible. But we're certainly not usually able to file in lots of countries and wait, to be paid back for that for either at all or for very long. And so that's where the timing comes in. If you're getting in at the very early stage of a new idea, then there's a good 2.5 years before you hit that time point where you've got to pick your countries. So that gives you time to raise money and get everything going, be able to cover those costs. Or if you're coming in later in the game, perhaps the university is just filed in US, and so maybe relatively lower costs overall there for the patents. And if that's enough for you to build your business, then you can get going pretty simply.
So how does the discovery typically happen? In other words, let's say as we explore this further, the startup works with the university trying to find out what is it they're researching, what they could possibly potentially help them build. I'm presuming they know upfront, saying the university says, hey, this is how much we expect for you to pay us at the end of the 3 months, end of the 6 months, or end of the year. And then the startup is like, yep, maybe we can afford to do it. So we engage in that and collaborate with the university. Or if they don't have the money, then they don't. Is that typically how it works?
Yeah, I mean, I think more often than not, we can find a solution. I do want to also point out that, while the bulk of our work is patents, there are also sometimes copyrights or even trademarks are involved, and sometimes trade secrets. So it's not very common because in universities we're always trying to publish. That's pretty much the name of the game. So it definitely limits the amount of trade secrets that we have. But sometimes that's available, and copyright can be available as well. A lot of it depends on what kind of policies the university has around those. But, those are much cheaper to protect, and so much lower cost to a potential partner.
Okay. And the typical size of companies that engage in something like this, in your experience, Brian, what is that? I mean, just to get an idea as to, are those really small, not too small? Like, what are the typical sizes of these companies?
Yeah, it can be anything. I mean, typically, I've worked oftentimes with individual entrepreneurs, and they can. I guess I should also mention that a lot of times this relationship doesn't necessarily start with a license. So that's another thing that helps with keeping the cost down as the entrepreneur is exploring the viability of the project. So a lot of times we start with an option to license, where it just reserves the right for the company to license when they're ready for a certain period of time. So that's much cheaper and lets them test it out and see if there's product market fit, and if they can put a team together and raise money, all these things. I lost my train of thought a little bit. What was your question again?
No, that's fine. No, I was just asking what
Size
you
of
answered it.
startups.
Yeah, startups. Yep.
Yeah, so it could be one or two people, but it could be a nice operating small business, um, or even a large company.
Okay, because the core essence of what the university is trying to do, just to get that idea, is that the university wants to see this built. They would do want to monetize, sure, right? But their interest, at least at the initial stages, is it. I'm presuming, being presumptuous about this, please. So please correct me if I'm wrong. I'm guessing it's not so much monetization, right? The university is probably more interested in seeing this built and executed and in production more than monetization in the initial stages, or is that not necessarily true?
Well, that's the main driver overall, period. But we have to be realistic and understand what are the resources of our partners at each stage. And early on for startups, they're very low.
Right. So in other words, but this is, I think we've captured a number of things, compared to an hour ago to now, as somebody who's not done this before, I have a lot more clarity, right? Of course, I have a lot of questions as well, but at least, it gives us the basic foundational elements. And I know a lot of people I do work with, at Snowpile and outside as well, we have an interest in doing this, but sometimes, the initial knowledge or the lack of knowledge, lack thereof, Brian, as you can imagine, is sort of the plays the bummer, right? Is the intimidating factor. So it's almost like, when you know the directions, you start feeling less uncomfortable, if you will, about driving a car, right? No matter which city you're in. If you understand how the directions and the street signs work in Paris, driving in Paris becomes a lot easier than otherwise. So some of this conversation to me clears a lot of muddied waters. But that said, I know these were random questions I had. Are there some areas that I've completely sort of missed and ignored just because I don't have that experience, like amongst what we've discussed here?
I think we did cover a lot, but I do want to follow up on your comment about um, learning about this and getting familiar and engaged. So, universities are a place of learning and education, right? And we are trying to build a community here of people that are interested in developing new technologies. So we try to be good neighbors, and we have events that are open to the public to bring in entrepreneurs and investors to mingle with our researchers and try to develop those relationships even before there's any licensing being done. So just to get that exposure, to bump elbows, and you never know, there could be somebody that makes a friend at one of those between business person and researcher, and and that's the core of the new business even before the invention is made, right?
Absolutely.
And so that's something that you should look and see, what kind of programming is being put on the various universities near you, and attend and get involved. So not just the tech transfer offices necessarily, but we also have a sister office, which is the Office of Innovation and Entrepreneurship, and they provide all this lean innovation training to anybody at GW that wants to start a business, as well as sometimes people in the region that have businesses and want to go through these customer discovery processes. They also train the trainers, so anybody that wants to be able to teach the lean innovation process, they've gone out and trained people around the world. And they have events all the time. They also have a new venture competition, so new startups that are being formed out of GW compete there. Our office has a technology uh, technology competition ourselves. So those are things that are licensable. We were having the inventors pitch, and but we have other events like just last month we had an event where we had 3 SBIR, STTR program directors from different agencies come out and talk, not just to our researchers, but to anybody in the community that wanted to come by and get some one-on-one time with them. So these are funding programs that the federal government provides to small businesses to do research to develop products. So you can see how this dovetails in. But we are happy to have folks come in, learn about getting this funding for themselves, whether or not they had a license with us. Um, and
Perfect. I think,
yeah,
sorry, keep going.
I just wanted to also mention that we have additional events related to our National Academy of Inventors chapter at GW. So that's an organization that recognizes inventors at universities, and we've been
Hey,
having
Brian,
a
can you
number
say
of
that? Just name of the organization one more time, please. What is it?
yes, the National Academy of Inventors.
Okay.
So
Okay.
we've
And these are,
had them showcase to the community, some of the the technologies that we've licensed, and bring in the entrepreneurs to share their story of the process.
this is amazing. Anything else that we've,
Yes,
that
I
I've
have
not
one more.
completely,
Have
yep,
one.
sure, please, please. Yep.
We also actually maybe two, I guess. So we partner with a group called the Society of Physician Entrepreneurs. One of the founders is Jeff Hausfeld. He lives in our area outside of DC. And
Hey, Brian,
so
sorry, one more time. Is a society of
Society of Physician Entrepreneurs.
physician, like this, right? Physician entrepreneurs.
Yes. So the idea originated with providing educational opportunities for doctors who aren't at universities so they can learn about this whole process, because they often have ideas to solve their own problems and they want to start companies to make these products. So that was the idea, and so you can see how this dovetails very well with our work, because we can explain the process, but we also want to engage these entrepreneurial folks with our physicians and inventors, so that we can develop
Oh,
new startup teams. So we've done a number of webinars. You can find those on our YouTube channel, as well as SOAP for short, for Society of Physician Entrepreneurs, as well as their channels. And we're having in-person events too. So we have one coming up this month. It's actually going to be up in Frederick.
okay, there's one coming up this month. Okay, awesome. I'll follow
Yeah.
up with you on that. Okay, so that's the different types of events. So in other words, this is amazing, right? This is a world, as somebody who's, just to be honest with you, been building software for years and living in the DC metro, pretty much most of my adult life at least. Uh, Not everything is aware because there's so much information that's out there. Uh, but being able to figure out what is relevant to you, how do you get started with many of these things, and how do you divvy up your time as a company to doing some of these things is part of our everyday challenge, right? We all have our own unique set of challenges. As a startup, I can speak to it because for the a majority of the time, we are like building whatever it is that we want to be building. And then we suddenly recognize, you know what, it's not good enough to just build it. Sure, it is important to build something, important to see it through to production. And I cannot stress that enough, Brian, just for anybody listening and watching as well, right? Because a lot of times you could be, as a company, I've realized that you could continue to build something, but it never goes to production. And, before we went live with our first product, that's a problem we actually had. And we couldn't point our fingers to where is the challenge. Is it a technical ability, or what was it that we were lacking? For every company there could be a different set of reasons, but it's enough to say that sometimes you could be making progress but actually not be going anywhere as a company, especially as a startup. So it's very important to make sure that whatever it is that you're building, no matter how small or big it is, that it actually works, right? Otherwise everything falls apart, right? It makes no sense. But then once it starts working, you then recognize that, well, is there product market fit? And hopefully you figured that out much sooner before, you completely build the whole thing. So there are a lot of these challenges. One more to add to the list is the abundant information that's available out there, and figuring out what makes sense to you at this given point of time, right? So just wanted to call out for that. Even as I digest this information, as you're sharing it with us here, immensely valuable. But the next challenge is going to be, okay, how do we take this forward, right? Don't be surprised if I hit you up because I'm most certainly going to do that. But I at least want to share that because everybody who's watching this will be in that position. would it be right to say, Brian, to say that there's a lot of universities, there's a lot of money, there's a lot of research happening, and we are a big, beautiful country. But to make it less overwhelming, should companies start out with engaging with schools and universities in their neck of the woods? Like, in other words, I say live in the DC metro. George Washington seems to be a natural fit, or UVA is not too far, or Virginia Tech, or University of Maryland College Park, whatnot. Rather than me trying to engage with Austin, University of Austin, right? Or I don't know, I went to school in Texas. I'm just calling out for some schools there. Or does it not matter? Like, what are your thoughts on, should startup and founders try to keep their focus narrow enough by working, and narrow in a good way, by working and engaging with schools that are in their neighborhood? Or should that not be the driving factor, and it should be more the type of research that the school is doing? Where should we keep our focus initially?
Well, I think there's no right answer there. I think that we're talking about building a strong long-term relationship, and probably it's easiest to do that in person. So having some in-person engagement will be really valuable. And whether you can get enough of that by traveling and meeting, once in a while, or not, that probably depends on the people that are involved. So we've certainly seen success uh, both ways, locally and relatively distant. Um, but there's a lot of failures too.
No, I completely understood. And as we come to closure here, at least for this initial conversation, do you have any questions? Like, it's been you adding value pretty much for the entire throughout the hour. But if there's any value I could add, I'd be more than happy to do it. Like, as somebody who runs a startup, do you have any questions that you may want to ask me? You may even know the answers to it, but just for the benefit of somebody else watching. But any questions that you have for me, Brian?
Um, well, I don't have anything at the top of my mind, but I did want to just mention that thank you for this opportunity, because for me, this is not my comfort zone. Uh, if you were to ask my family whether I would be doing a podcast when I was growing up, they would say, no chance in hell, because Brian is not a talker. But here we are, stretching a bit, but not too much, because we're talking about something of which I'm, very passionate about, and have been, really uh, dive deep in over the last 13 years. So uh, I'm happy to do it, and I hope it worked out, and we got something accomplished here. I actually think this is going to be a nice resource. Anybody I want to introduce to tech transfer, I can tell them to check out your podcast.
No, no, absolutely. And it's amazingly valuable, because I'll be honest with you. As I, the earlier part of a lot of our initial podcasts were very solo, and it's just a lot of times it's me primarily talking to myself. And I figured sometimes, as a smaller company, when everybody's busy doing other things, and you're coding as a developer solo, it is actually more fun to do it with somebody, even if nobody's actually here. I'm just looking at a camera and I'm talking. And if you're like me, who's chatty, I know you mentioned you may not be as chatty as someone like me, but I'm just saying, if you're chatty and you want to do it, I just hit record and I start, just writing some code. And I feel like by talking, it just makes me feel like I'm sitting with like 10 other people, when literally there is literally nobody here. And then I've recognized that, when other people watch it, they're like, you know what? Krish could be doing this for like 20 years, but he still seems to be hitting a roadblock or staring at a wall every so often. And and I've had people tell me, Krish, if you can do it, I can do it. And I've taken that as a compliment. And hopefully, no matter how they meant it, I've taken that as a compliment, because the idea behind sharing the little I do know here, Brian, is making sure the people who feel like, hey, maybe we need this, that, and the other to get started. The hope is to convince people, no, no, you don't need anything. If you have the passion, you mentioned the word passion. I think that, in my mind, is the most important thing, right? You have that, nobody's going to stop you, right? Unless you stop yourself. I mean, unless you give up, and nobody can make you give up, right? I mean, I'm not a motivational speaker, I'm far from it, but at least I can say that every day as an entrepreneur, it's no less challenging than the day before, right? It's like, oh my God, there are like 17 different things you have to do. And a lot of times you're not even sure what to do. But then it's people like you who show up, and Brian, who are sharing this invaluable information right now. Again, can I go research a lot of this? Maybe, right? But the time it's going to take to doing that, and sometimes you cannot digest it. Looking at words and text is different from looking at people and emotions. So what you've shared here over the last 1 hour has been immensely helpful, not just to me. I'm super convinced to anybody else watching this. Now, some of this is very US centric, I should say. A lot of our predominantly our audience is here in the US, so it's fine. But if folks are located not in the country, right? I want to just, as your closing comments and thoughts, because we do have watchers, listeners who are dialing in, from like some many parts of Europe and some in South Asia as well. A lot of this conversation was very specific to the United States, so to speak. But if there's something you could share that could benefit at a higher level, even if not specifically at a 30,000, 50,000 foot level for somebody who's watching this from some other part of the world, and the answer could be not really. You could say, Krish, no, I mean, that's not what you do. Completely understandable. But if there's something you could share that might be applicable to somebody who's not located here, Brian, what would that be?
Well, I mean, first of all, I want to point out that the Autumn organization is international, and they're actively trying to grow the international base. The process is very similar in Europe. If you want to go to one of their universities or to license, and I should also point out that there's great research institutions at our federal government as well as those in Europe that also are coming up with inventions they're trying to license out. So that's another source that you can go to. It's not just universities. But this is a worldwide process of technology transfer that you can get engaged in. Likewise with entrepreneurship. They may not have as developed an ecosystem to raise the funds that they need to take things forward in certain countries, but they may very well have a local research institution with some ideas willing to partner. And so I think it's worth a go. But what you said about the passion and drive, that's 100% right. That's any success that I've seen in this process, that's been a present ingredient in the team. They're just not going to give up for anything. And it's important that they express that to folks like me when they're trying to partner with us, because we are looking for those key ingredients to success. That's what we want when we're going to do a deal. So don't be hiding that kind of passion. Whether you're an inventor or entrepreneur, please express that as we develop our relationship and our plans.
No, beautifully said, right? And I just say that I'm going to rephrase that just in pure developer terms, if you will, even though it might sound silly, but I'm just going to say it. Sometimes, you work on implementing a feature, things go very well, for many days at a stretch, and you become worried about it because things shouldn't really be going that well when you're coding. You have to run into some roadblocks or something of that nature. But there are times, few and far between, it happens where you don't really run into big roadblocks and you execute it because you've done it before. You're sort of a well-oiled machine. Like, we build APIs, and as we build new APIs, we run into different challenges, but at least the basic pipeline is in place, so we know sort of what we're doing. But the beauty is, there are times when you fix a simple bug and it takes like 3 days to fix it, right? And it was not too long ago where I was fixing an issue. It took over 2 days, a whole 2 days to fix it. And the actual lines of code, I shouldn't even say lines of code because it's plural. It was singular. It was a single line of code, and it is not even a single entire line of code. It was literally 3 words, and I think I captured that in a solo podcast at some point. I just want to tell people that it was 2 days, and it was extremely frustrating because you're trying to build some other feature, and you're blocked, and you're fixing this annoying bug, and it takes 2 days, and it's 3 words that you change, and things are working fine, and you're like, did I waste my time? As it turns out, it's not a waste of time because you sometimes learn a lot more in those painful processes than in the feature that you built, right? I could be implementing like 7 different endpoints for 3 weeks or 2 weeks, and things go hunky dory. And it's great because we feel like we did a lot and we might have done a fair bit. But the core learning as a developer, you're like, you know what? I actually feel like I learned a bit more about engineering in that single bug that I fixed. That was 3 words and it took 2 days, than in the feature that, where we ended up implementing a number of endpoints. And I mentioned that as a follow up to what you said, even if it seems completely random and unrelated. I promise my intent was not for it to be unrelated. Is you need that passion, because if you don't have that, you're going to give up on that bug. There are times I would be like, you know what, is this bug important enough? Can we live with it? How many people recognize this issue? What is the priority? Can we ignore it? But sometimes it's the priority of what the pain point is, it is for your customers. But there is also this pain point as a developer, right? Because you wanted to fix it, you gave it everything for those 2 days and you didn't do it. Your productivity in the next 3 days is going to be quite abysmal, even in an unrelated manner, because you didn't fix that issue. Just because you fix that issue, you feel like you've accomplished something. It's like rocket science, and then you chug along much faster. It's like a weird thing to say, but I think it's true, at least for me, and I hope, I mean, it might be the case for other people as well, where you fix these issues that might not be super important from a customer standpoint, and it took the extra 1 or 2 hours, but then it makes you extremely productive for the next 3 weeks because you have the sense of accomplishment, right? And all of that doesn't mean anything much from a dollar standpoint, not all the time, but that means a heck of a lot from a passion standpoint. And that, I think, you need a lot of it as a small company, as you're learning new things. And now I've learned so many things the last 70 minutes of just listening to you, Brian, uh, which which does not come outside of going outside of your comfort zone, sort of hitting Brian up and bugging Brian to get on a podcast, and then Brian graciously agrees to do it. So a long-winded thank you. I could have just said thank you like 4 minutes ago and saved all of his time, but it's just my not so succinct way of saying thank you to you, to sort of sharing everything, not everything, but to the extent that you're able to share in this initial conversation.
Well, I thank you. This is really my life's goal was to be somebody that can provide some useful advice, and I'm fortunate enough to finally be, to be in a position where I can do that. And you gave me the opportunity today. I get to exercise that, to help guide our inventors and entrepreneurs on a daily basis. So that's one reason I love this job in tech transfer. But before we leave everybody, just go ahead and email us at tco@gw.edu, and we can have another conversation one on one.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I'm actually going to let me share the screen real, because just so I don't, we're going to share the transcript as well. But just to complete this, can you say that email address one more time, Brian?
tco@gwu.edu.
I got this right? This one here?
Yep, that's it. Technology
Perfect.
Commercialization Office. So
At
open door
GW.
policy. We're happy to be good neighbors. Everybody who wants to learn about how to make new products out of research.
Lovely. And I'm going to share this, this my Krish's image. Hopefully I did some justice to what I've tried to capture here. Sometimes it's not easy, at least for me, to listen to somebody saying something and capture notes, but I've tried to become a little bit better. I was horrible like probably a year ago, but having done this a little bit, hopefully I've at least captured the core essence of it, even if it's not perfect, so people at least know, sort of where to get started and how to go forward from
And I
here.
guess, Krish, I
uh,
would be remiss if I didn't mention that if you really want to dig deep in this subject, I contributed a chapter along with my mentor in a book which is called Innovation in Anesthesiology. So
oh no,
we
wait,
wrote
hang
a
on, can you say that, give me, let me make a note of this here. Actually, can you say that, and the name of the book?
Innovation in Anesthesiology. So this covers the entire process from ideation through productization.
Oh my
And our
god,
chapter,
my spelling is going to be tested here. I'm going to write the wrong one here, and then you can correct me here.
yeah,
Okay.
that tests mine too, but there's autocorrect, so we're both okay. Uh, at least if you put it in,
Oh
some
no,
kind of
maybe I
word
got it
processor.
right then. This looked like the right spelling. Maybe did I get that right?
It
That
has a
could be a
red line,
coincidence.
but we're close enough. But this covers the whole process, and the chapter we wrote was about the licensing from universities piece of it. But if you want to
Okay, you know
learn
what?
all the
I'm gonna
steps along the way,
actually let me share my screen, another screen here. Let me see. Let me make sure I pull up the right book here. Let me stop sharing and share a different window.
yeah, that's it.
Okay, perfect. Anesthesiology. Let me correct my. Got it. So, perfect. At least this is something folks can check out as well, right? So what we'll do, Brian, on our side is include. I'm going to include the link to your, as we publish the podcast, link to your the book, the link we just found, and your LinkedIn profile, and the email address that you mentioned there. But if there's other links that you want for us to include, we are more than happy to do that, right? And we'll get this published with the transcript. So if I captured some of the things not perfectly, at least on the image, at least the transcript is going to do a slightly better job as well. So this is awesome. I'm going to have you wrap up. Anything else you want to say before we close this?
I just want to say, reach out. Let's please, if you're interested in developing technology, grow your network with researchers and tech transfer professionals at universities.
Absolutely. And again, folks, as we come to closure here, we talked to Brian Coblitz, who's the executive director of the George Washington University Technology Commercialization Office. We talked about a number of different things, but the idea here was to at least sort of be somebody who as Snowpal, we are a company, we build products, we have many in production, and one of the things we haven't yet done, at least up until this point, is collaborate and work closely with the university. But with this learning, I promise you, we're going to put this to practice quite soon. We're going to end this here, and I'm going to share all the links and everything that Brian shared with us during the last an hour and a half. So thank you so much, Brian, for taking the time to chat with us. And I can't personally wait to get this published. So it benefits, a lot of the business and entrepreneurial community out there.
Thank you very much, Krish.
And you want to stay on just so this recording completes, Brian, just for a minute or two after I hit stop here. Yep, thanks.
Sure.